Hello and welcome to this wonderful Medal of Honor retrospective. In this video I not only take a look at the first part of the successful but now defunct first-person shooter, which just happens to be celebrating its 25th anniversary this year, but I also explore the exciting question of what connects Medal of Honor, the Xbox Classic, Jurassic Park and Rare's N64 premium FPS GoldenEye 007. So grab a snack and something to drink, sit back and enjoy my new video. Let's get started. It's hard to believe. Medal of Honor was on my backlog for 25 years. I wanted to experience the game for myself for that long, but as is often the case, a lack of free time and many other video games that simply had a higher priority kept getting in my way of my plans in recent years. Now I've finally played the game sensibly and finished it. What I think of it and whether it is still worth a look 25 years after its release, I will tell you in the second part of this retrospective. First of all, I would like to take a look behind the scenes of the World War II shooter and tell you a little about the development history, as it is really exciting and also answers the question of what Jurassic Park, GoldenEye 007 on the N64 and the first Xbox have in common with this game. To shed some light on the matter, we have to travel back to 1995. On March 22nd, the film production company DreamWorks Pictures and Microsoft formed the development studio DreamWorks Interactive. Steven Spielberg played a key role in the founding of the studio and also led most of the discussions with Microsoft. As co-founder of DreamWorks Pictures, it was important to Spielberg to have a foot in the video game industry alongside the film business, which seemed to be getting bigger and bigger, as he himself had noticed in projects with LucasArts and Atari. 10 days later, DreamWorks Pictures entered into a $50 million deal with Silicon Graphics Incorporated. The aim was to use Silicon Graphics Incorporated's groundbreaking 3D technology in upcoming Hollywood productions, such as new Jurassic Park films after the first part was a huge success. If you've seen my N64 documentary, you'll know that Silicon Graphics Incorporated was not only involved in the film business, but also worked with Nintendo on new console hardware that would be released as the Nintendo 64. Nintendo's British hitmaker Rare soon developed the aforementioned GoldenEye 007, which was to revolutionize the first-person shooter genre on consoles. And while Rare was busy working on the James Bond game, DreamWorks Interactive began talks with Silicon Graphics to use the technical possibilities in their video games as well. Since its founding in March 95, a few games have been released for Windows PCs, but they were not worth mentioning. But that was to change in 1997. Steven Spielberg approached the development team with a special concept as early as 1996. Fascinated by the Second World War, Steven Spielberg wanted to create a game set in this era. Also because he had got his hands on a script around the time that was supposed to be released in 1998 as Saving Private Ryan. Spielberg's concept materialized in the following months. Parallel to the filming of Saving Private Ryan, Spielberg wrote the concept of a World War II video game, thought about the production of such a project and also created the story and some of the characters. At that time, DreamWorks Interactive secured a publishing deal with Electronic Arts, who were considered as financiers and publishers for the new project. When he saw his son playing GoldenEye, it dawned on him. His video game project was also to be in the first-person shooter genre, and when filming for Saving Private Ryan was finished in September 97, he brought the entire DreamWorks Interactive team together. Work began on a first prototype, but this was not exactly met with enthusiasm by DreamWorks Interactive's management. The decision-makers doubted the scenario, arguing that gamers were more comfortable with, quote, ray guns, hellspawn and laser rifles. Spielberg, however, did not give up and hired Dale Dye, with whom he had already worked on Saving Private Ryan. Dye was a Vietnam veteran and earned his living as an actor, author and military advisor, a role that he also took on Spielberg's video game project and first picked the prototype apart. He described the first demo as exploitative and irresponsible, but stuck with it because he was convinced that the studio and Spielberg had honorable intentions. With his help, the game acquired the necessary historical authenticity over the next few months, so that in March 98 a new demo was ready and was clearly different from the first prototype. Spielberg attached great importance to enriching the gaming experience with new elements that had not been seen in genres before, such as the possibility to going undercover and having to show false papers if necessary, which ultimately made it into the game and ensured that publisher Electronic Arts became more and more enthusiastic. But he was not the only Hollywood big name to have worked on the game. Film composer Michael Giacchino joined the team, an expert who had already worked with DreamWorks Interactive in the past, and wanted to ensure that the game had a cinematic soundtrack that was unrivaled in the genre. However, three major hurdles had to be overcome before the planned release at the end of 1999. The first hurdle came with the release of Trespasser, a game based on the successful Jurassic Park license, which was also very promising and whose release was eagerly awaited. Unfortunately, Trespasser was a major flop and only sold 50,000 copies. Several employees at DreamWorks Interactive left the studio after the game's release at the end of 1998. This included Seamus Blackley, who was a producer on Trespasser and had a strong relationship with Spielberg. Blackley would later join Microsoft and be responsible for the development of the Xbox, but at the end of 1998 he left Steven Spielberg with serious doubts about whether the video game industry was not a one-way street after all. A few months later, after the Columbine High School shooting in March 1999, video games were once again in the crosshair of politics, which meant that the developers had to adjust the level of violence in the game and tone down many scenes, something which Spielberg also did not like. To make matters worse, the president of the Congressional Medal of Honor Society, the veterans organization responsible for awarding the Medal of Honor, learned of the development of the game of the same name through preview reports. He criticized the fact that such a serious and sacred symbol of American history was being used for a video game. Steven Spielberg then considered abandoning the project altogether, but his producer colleague Peter Hirschman showed a demo of the game and was able to secure the support of the Congressional Medal of Honor Society, which, as you can probably imagine, caused a major positive stir in America. On October 31, 1999, Medal of Honor finally appeared on the PlayStation in the US, before Europeans were able to get their hands on the first-person shooter on November 10th. The press was full of high ratings. To date, Medal of Honor has a Metacritic average rating of 9.2, making it the best rated first-person shooter game on the PlayStation and the entire Medal of Honor series. Speaking of the series, with over 1.5 million units sold, Medal of Honor was re-released as Greatest Hits, or Platinum version, and expanded into a whole series that was released under Electronic Arts from the year 2000 onwards and found its last offshot to date in 2020 with Medal of Honor Above and Beyond. So let's take a look at what made Medal of Honor a hit 25 years ago and whether the game can still inspire in 2024. After all, I missed it when it was released and was able to approach the first-person shooter without any nostalgia. I played the version via the DuckStation emulator, which gave me a higher resolution version in 4K. And I'm happy to give you a spoiler at this point, because I thought Medal of Honor was really great. That was due to many small and large things that make the game very unique in my eyes, which is why I fully can understand the euphoria about it, but hey, let's start at the beginning. In Medal of Honor you take on the role of James Patterson, an ex-pilot who works for the OSS between 1944 and 1945, an American secret service that actually existed and operated secretly behind enemy lines until the end of World War II. This starting point alone gives the game a realistic undertone that also extends across 7 missions that Medal of Honor has to offer. The 7 main missions are divided into 24 levels, which kept me glued to the controller for about 6.5 hours. You start in an OSS headquarters where you can select various menu items. This includes the missions, the briefing, the cinema room, the multiplayer or the options. The fact that the developers went to the trouble of creating such a main menu is a testament to the dedication they put into the game. A title screen with selectable menu items would certainly have done the trick, but this gives the game a very unique charm even before you start the first mission. These are introduced with video sequences that show archive footage, which also contributes enormously to the atmosphere and has been adopted in many other games of this type. What's really cool is that the missions are integrated into the context of real-life situations, which gives the missions even more weight and is something I've rarely seen in other games. This also shows the attention to detail with which Spielberg and his team approached the material. There is no large overarching plot, however. By successfully completing missions, you contribute to the Germans not winning the war and ultimately having to admit defeat to the Allies. The advantage is that you are sent all over Europe as a character, which of course gives the game the necessary variety. So you find yourself in France in the first mission and are supported by the French resistant fighter Manon, who would get her own game in the year 2000 with Medal of Honor Underground. Anyway, in France, in the first level, you can familiarize yourself with the controls, which are quite special in Medal of Honor. I have to clarify two things here. Although there were already first-person shooters on the PlayStation with titles like Doom, Quake 2, Disruptor or Alien Trilogy, there was no standard when it came to the controls of these games. Every developer did their own thing back then, which led to DreamWorks Interactive also coming up with a control concept that takes some getting used to at first, especially if you play the game on today's perspective. You move forward or backward using the D-pad. If you press left or right, Patterson look in the respective direction. To strafe, which is not unimportant in first-person shooters, you have to use L1 or R1, whereas R2 makes a crosshair appear and the hero crouches when you press L2. You shoot with X, which can seem really strange from today's perspective, but you get used to it relatively quickly. As well as the fact that you can only rotate weapons with the circle button and only in one direction. Square is for reloading or for context-sensitive actions, such as opening doors or placing explosives, while you jump with triangle. If you play the game with a DualShock controller as I did, then the actions of the D-pad are transferred to the left stick, while the right stick remains inactive. Well, at least if you use the standard controls, which I did throughout my playthrough. And what feels really antiquated at first becomes second nature relatively quickly. But what I find absolutely impressive is the fact that there is a setup in the control settings that is not that far from today's standards. You just have to set it up. If you choose the fourth preset from the 5 available, you can move forwards or backwards with the left stick and strafe while looking around with the right stick. You then shoot with R2 while L2 calls up the crosshair. Medal of Honor plays very similarly to modern FPS games, which really surprised me in a positive way. DreamWorks Interactive got the hang of it 25 years ago and sees the setup as the fourth preset in the controller settings. It's just a shame that I noticed it after I had played through the entire game. So if you want to catch up on Medal of Honor today, you should definitely look at the controller settings, but oh well, whatever. What remains the same, no matter which setup you choose, is the fact that Patterson cannot move when aiming with the crosshairs. And that is desperately needed to make accurate shots, because otherwise you will always fire where the rifle is pointing. And you have to get used to it too. In Medal of Honor you cannot run through the battlefield like a berserker, dealing one headshot after another. If you want to aim well, you are at the mercy of enemy shots, unless you are fast enough with the rifle or proceed with caution, which I really liked, by the way. So you sneak carefully, paying attention to every movement and late into the darkness, which is also omnipresent in Medal of Honor and puts your vision aside so as not to overload the console. What the fog was on the 64 in Medal of Honor is a pitch black wall that swallows up the environment and enemies and reveals them just a few meters in front of you. Anyone who rushes forward headlong will die soon, as the enemies are also well armed and blessed with a touch of intelligence. Similar to GoldenEye, they use cover, throw themselves on the ground or throw grenades back, which left people open-mouthed at the time and makes Medal of Honor a challenging game even today. You notice this especially from the middle of the game, when more enemies suddenly stand in your way or use rocket launchers that can send you to the afterlife with one shot. At this point you have to proceed cautiously, but that doesn't mean that the gameplay takes all the dynamic out of the gaming experience, quite the opposite. You try to defend yourself with 12 different weapons when over 20 different types of enemies want to get on you. And since there is no checkpoint system, you have to start the level from the beginning if you die a virtual death. I have to admit that the lack of checkpoints annoyed me a few times, especially towards the end. Rechargeable health is also not available. Medal of Honor comes from a time when health packs were standard. So if you run out of energy, you have to hope for a health pack, and if you don't find one before the next enemies come your way, all you can do is hope that you aim faster than them. Fortunately, the levels are not particularly long or extensive, so the frustration when trying again is limited. And the well-designed environments, the incredible soundtrack and the varied tracks all contribute to this. The general gameplay of Medal of Honor reminded me a lot of GoldenEye or Perfect Dark. Each level presents you with different challenges. Sometimes you have to find a plane wreck, sometimes secure documents or blow up fuel tanks. The tasks are varied and ensure that you are always alert as you go through the levels, even when there are no soldiers nearby. And then there are the undercover levels, which were integrated into the game at the behest of Steven Spielberg. Here you have to move through enemy camps, show false ID papers to vigilant soldiers, or make sure that you get new papers, which means quickly taking out important officers. These missions are few and far between and can be annoying at first, especially if you don't know what to do, but they also add a lot to the atmosphere. And speaking of which, if there's one thing that Medal of Honor excels at, it's creating an incredible dense atmosphere that I've rarely seen on the PlayStation 1. And the sound design and music contributes to most of that. The gun sounds are some of the best I've heard on a console, and I mean, we are talking about a 25-year-old game here. But holy cow, do the guns have a punch. It's so incredibly satisfying to fire the machine gun or the cannon in this game, but hear for yourself. And then the music by Michael Giacchino that plays in the background is probably the best thing about the whole game. Seriously, the soundtrack is insanely good. So good, in fact, that Giacchino won an award for it. The melodies that play in the background are in no way inferior to major Hollywood productions, and the PlayStation's CD technology ensures that the music plays out of the speakers in wonderful quality. I only can imagine how great it must have been to experience this soundtrack of this game in 1999, when video games in this genre were not yet so cinematic. The enemy's animations are also cinematic in a way. Here too, Medal of Honor is reminiscent of GoldenEye, although I find the animations in this game a little better than in Rare's flagship shooter. They react very individually to fire. For example, they grab their legs or arms when you shoot them, throw themselves to the ground, roll out of your field of vision, or try to get up again after you have shot at them. You can even shoot soldiers' helmets off their heads, which certainly caused people to open their mouths at the time. The general graphics are of course very old from today's perspective, and the lack of foresight is a testament to a time long forgotten. Nevertheless, I think that Medal of Honor is still impressive for a game from 1999, even if the DuckStation emulator with its higher resolution is partially responsible for the positive appearance. I also tried it on the CRT and found it very nice there too. I liked the levels that were set in bunkers or mines the best. The outdoor areas, like here in snowy Norway, don't look so good in comparison. But yes, basically DreamWorks Interactive have delivered a very good game here, which is convincing on all fronts and skillfully demonstrated in 1999 that the PlayStation could also offer good first-person shooters. From today's perspective, the graphics and controls are of course no longer up to date, which should come as no surprise to anyone. And nostalgics who have a soft spot for such visuals and are not above spending a little time with the controls will certainly enjoy it, as Medal of Honor simply doesn't do much wrong. And musically, the game hasn't lost any of its class anyway. If you like the genre and have the opportunity to catch up on the game, you should do as soon as possible. If I had played Medal of Honor back then, it would certainly be one of my favorite games of all time, and I would mention it in the same sentence with other FPS hits like GoldenEye or Turok. I can fully understand the fascination behind it, understand the high ratings, and I'm honestly surprised that Medal of Honor sold only 1.5 million copies. But that is certainly also related to the release period. At the end of '99, the PlayStation was already 5 years old and the PlayStation 2 was just around the corner. For me, Medal of Honor is definitely a must for every PlayStation 1 owner, and at just under 7 hours it's very enjoyable to play today. The game did have a multiplayer mode, but I couldn't test it out because I didn't have a teammate. But I don't think Medal of Honor is necessarily remembered for its 2-mode multiplayer anyway. It's more the overall cinematic package that perfectly paired the cinematic atmosphere with good playability and ensured that Medal of Honor is still worth a look 25 years later. And not many games can say that. But what do you think of the game? Did you play Medal of Honor back then or did it pass you by? Tell me in the comments and we'll chat a bit. I hope you enjoyed my video and look forward to a like if you did. Thanks for watching and see you next time here on Pixel Chronicles. Bye.